patriotism, faith, national unity, education, fiscal responsibility, civility, the values that define America. Fascinating stories and talks from America-loving patriots dedicated to preserving freedom, opportunity, and justice. Welcome to the Friends and Fellow Citizens podcast. Hello everyone, Happy New Year, and welcome to another episode of Friends and Fellow Citizens, episode 112. I'm your host, Sherman Tylowski. Thank you all so much for joining me. Hope you are enjoying the rest of the winter holiday season. If you're wrapping up the parties and the celebrations, I hope you're looking forward to another full calendar year of Friends and Fellow Citizens. And this week we are starting off right after New Year's Day. Today, on January 2nd, we are kicking off 2023 with an interview episode, and I'll introduce my guest in just a few moments. But as a kind reminder, make sure to subscribe to Friends and Fellow Citizens if you haven't already. Check out our merchandise store to pick up a Friends and Fellow Citizens mug, either for yourself or for your friends and family. And once again, a new year, but it doesn't change the fact that I am so appreciative of our Patreon supporters. A big shout out to all of them and what they do every single week to support our show. This week's guest is David Tennent. Dave is a Pittsburgh native who moved to DC 3.5 years ago to pursue politics and digital media, but ended up fulfilling his true dream of creating a business. Dave went to the University of Pittsburgh in film studies. He worked on the Hill for 3 years, mainly working for his home member of Congress as digital director. He currently lives in Navy Yard. He recently got engaged, which is amazing. He's planning a wedding with the love of his life right now. He used to wait tables at the Mission Navy Yard to pay the bills, but he was able to quit the Hill in March of when he launched Connect, which is the business that we're going to be talking about today, and really just what it means for him and for the space that we'll be discussing today in relation to Congress. During his free time, he usually spends time reading, doing anything active like hiking, basketball, swimming, yoga, etc. He loves spending time with his friends, really diving deeper into his church community. All right, everyone. Well, I am very, very excited to have Dave Tennent on the podcast. Dave, thank you so much for coming on our program today.
Thanks, man. I'm pumped to be here.
Well, first of all, I just want to preface, I met Dave back in 2021 while I was interning on the Hill in the first half of that year, and we had an opportunity to not only see each other down the hallways of the Cannon House office building, but also to be able to talk to him one-on-one. And he's just an incredible person, very entrepreneurial, and someone I really wanted to bring on this program. So, Dave, let's start off with kind of your background and how you got interested in politics and how that eventually kind of narrowed down from general interest in politics to specifically Congress.
Yeah, for sure. First off, real quick, I love getting to meet you on the Hill. Off the bat, I was like, whoa, this dude knows way too much about everything about politics. So shout out to you for being like one of the smartest kids on the Hill as an intern. So it was very cool to see and get to hear your story.
Appreciate that.
Yeah, of course. As far as my trip through politics, kind of grew up in it. My mom was very involved in the political scene, both locally in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, but also nationally. So from the time I was like 5 years old, I remember sitting at lunch, listening to my mom and her business partner just talk about politics. And it was every single day in my life. So I felt like I just inherently understood it from a very young age. And grew up like from childhood to going off to college, had always just had it be a main part of my life to the point where I kind of ran away from it. When I got to college, I was like, okay, I don't want to do politics at all. I don't want to be a poli-sci major. I don't want to study government, anything like that. So I ended up being a film studies major. I thought that I had already kind of inherently had that knowledge, so I didn't need to go to school for it, which was there's some hubris involved in that, but I definitely just wanted to just take a different route. And I loved production. And I ended up learning graphic design, video production, photography, a lot of things that actually came to help me out on the Hill a lot later, and added a set of value that not very many people have in Washington, D.C., which is the more creative, technical side of communications. So that really helped me out in the process. But at the time, I didn't know it was going to take me there. But so spent my time at the University of Pittsburgh, really enjoyed it, did film studies. After that, I graduated and started to work for a uh, startup that was doing on-demand laundry service for college students. So quite innovative. But ultimately, I liked my job and I learned a lot and learned a lot about guerrilla marketing. But ultimately, I was missing out in Pittsburgh the whole work experience and working a small startup. I wasn't like getting to hang out with coworkers or anything like that. So I also just needed a change of scenery and a change of lifestyle. And so I started to pray about where I was going to go with life. And ultimately, I was led to DC. And so that's something my mom had told me for years, like move to DC after school, move to DC after school. And I vehemently opposed it. But in the end, she was right. I hope she doesn't hear that. Um, but she knows it. So basically, all right, I was like, if I'm going to DC, there's only one place to go, Congress. So I quit my job, had a pretty good paying job, and took an internship on Capitol Hill, making $800 a month. But that was kind of my intro from politics growing up to running away to coming back to it, because I realized I knew it so well that I didn't need the degree in the end, but I did have this like understanding of how politics worked at a level that people can study and understand how Congress works. And I didn't admittedly really understand that process nearly as well. But I understood the true nature of politics.
That's a fascinating story. I mean, just going from, that politics and then to film and then kind of going back to that. And I'm sure you agree that mothers are always right. So that kind of
Yeah.
advice, I think, never gets away from you. It just kind of gives you another path to pursue, and ultimately it was something that you went on. And I just think it's a fun, fascinating time to get into politics over the last few years. I mean, a lot of topsy-turvy worlds going on. And speaking about topsy-turvy worlds, let's talk about kind of your overall your time in Congress, and maybe just some of the things that you learned or some things that you were really surprised about compared to how you viewed our federal legislature before you started.
Yeah, that's a big question overall, but I'd say I came to the Hill at such a wild time and such a historical time. It was right before the Mueller report came out, so I got everything. I from an intern on was just like hit the ground running, was just helping a lot with digital media, but what I noticed or what I saw take place in like my first 6 months on the Hill was Mueller report, the Judiciary Committee hearing behind that, and then getting into the whole impeachment process. I was on a congressman's staff who was on Judiciary Committee, so ultimately impeachment came through us, and I was working 7 a.m. till 1, 2 a.m. every day, and it was miserable, but also very fun. And at the time, we also had an HBO documentary crew following us around for what later became known as The Swamp, which exposes political corruption and like money in politics in a very interesting way. But so I just came to a time where like, the world seemed like it was crumbling inside American politics. But yeah, inside of that process, I hadn't had too many like preconceived notions of what the Hill or Congress was going to look like. Obviously, I'd taken my Gov and AP Gov classes, so I knew the gist, but humanizing everyone and seeing it from the inside was truly the most interesting part of it. Seeing that these people that you see on TV, on Fox or CNN or whatever, in real life and how they operate and who they are as human beings. Some people having very interesting personalities and very magnetic personalities, and other people just like being very bland and really not having much to them. But what I ultimately realized through that process was how much power the individual staffer held, and the power staffers as a collective hold. I thought the congressmen did all their work. Like, I didn't know how the system worked from the inside. But when I got there, I quickly realized some congressmen are better than others on this, but a lot of times the nitty gritty of every aspect of how the congressional office is run is led to the staffer. And I think that's a really cool opportunity. But what scared me is it's not like these are, for the most part, like wise and older people running the government. For the most part, it's 22 to 28-year-olds running it. And they're having the time of their lives when they get off work. And it's just really hilarious to put it all together and be like, oh, these are the people that run our country. And I'm part of that now. And I don't feel qualified for this.
That's really, really cool to just hear, kind of your realizations. And it's something that I think every intern kind of notices because you're working so closely with the staff. And while every single intern is going to say, and rightly so, that the experience with the member of Congress is going to be very, very limited. I mean, I had very limited one-on-one with the congressman, which is understandable given how hectic the schedule is. But really just working with that staff is so critical. And I kind of wanted to segue this into kind of the larger picture of some of the issues that are facing Congress. And obviously one of the big ones that you probably heard a lot, Dave, from maybe your friends, family, and people just outside of DC is really just how people perceive Congress as a very polarized institution. And it's not the only one. And I'm not going to say that it's where all the polarization started, but it's certainly, I think, an area of concern that a lot of people have on just, I think part of it is because people really haven't had a whole huge grasp on how things work there. What's kind of your assessment on just some of the polarization issues that you're seeing, and maybe not necessarily so just on media, but just on maybe the way things kind of generally work, or things that you think have changed but have not really brought a lot of people together as much as we anticipated?
Yeah, I think polarization or partisanship has been a long time coming, and it started decades ago. But from 2015 on, it is sharply increased, like a hockey stick. Um, Now there's plenty of different routes to go down to have that discussion, but ultimately, I think what it comes down to is I'll stay away from social media, which is obviously a huge part of this. But I think there's just a lot of rhetoric that is very divisive because it plays. And whether it is social media or getting on Fox or CNN for your clip to be played in your 5 minutes talking about an issue, the people that are out there trying to say, hey, like, this is a real problem. We need to come together. We need to actually legislate. They're not getting put on TV as much. Now, I would argue that the general electorate, they say they want Congress to do more, which is absolutely true. But at the same time, a lot of the party bases don't want their representatives to work with the other side of the aisle. And now, obviously, and very like middle of the road districts, it's not the same. But we do have a large number of congressional districts that lean heavily one way or the other. And if you don't vote with the party 90% of the time or more, then a challenger from your further right or left will come out and say that they will, and they will. And so, and the base wants that. And they're the ones that control the primaries to get this right person there. And so I think that's like from an electoral side of things, that's how we end up in these scenarios is we have people that are preaching divisiveness when they're trying to get elected, and then ultimately go in and fulfill that mindset. I get where they're coming from. I get the ideological divide in this country right now. And that rhetoric is trickling down to the staffer. And ultimately, what I've seen is there will be, even in the Judiciary Committee, which was like one of the most contentious committees in Congress, as soon as the cameras were off, the C-SPAN stream was done, the committee hearings done, they're walking to the other side of the dais and talking to people on the other side of the aisle, the other congressmen, and they're having buddy conversations. The American electorate does not see that. They see the division. They don't see the behind the scenes, which is ultimately just creating this theatric movement in politics. But at the same time, the individual staffer is expected not to cross party lines in a lot of offices, and they're expected to stick with their own. And I think that's a very dangerous expectation to have, especially for a younger generation that's still molding a lot of their ideas.
It's so true what you point out. I remember when I was interning in summer 2019, and I raised this question to the congressman I was interning for, and he said to me something along the lines of, "How can members of Congress expect to be more civil when the people are not being more civil?" And I think that's a
Yeah.
really, really important point. It's something you kind of alluded to, Dave, which is there needs to be some kind of symmetry here going on, because if we're saying that members of Congress are elected by constituencies, well, if they in a way they have to be kind of an embodiment of those constituencies, because otherwise they'll
Right.
be kind of seen as out of touch with their constituencies. Kind of a
Yeah.
weird situation. It's kind of like chicken or the egg sort of question a bit too, because some people might think, okay, people need to act better, but they'll probably never self-criticize and say I need to do better in terms of reaching out.
I think that's a really interesting point. I think our political system would do a lot better if we had people that were willing to say, I messed up, or I should have done this or that better. Um, it's not set up that way. When have you ever heard, unless there's like a really bad scandal, a congressman or congresswoman saying, I messed up? Like we don't take responsibility for our actions. And that's a problem. And I think that ultimately, yeah, the chicken or egg is really frustrating. And I have this like debate in my mind all the time of well, are they supposed to just be a representative of their constituents, or should they be the leaders? And I think at some point they have to be the leaders and not stoop down to the levels, but be above the toxicity of partisan politics. And it's not to say that you have to start voting a different way all the time, but just the rhetoric surrounding it, and to have a more open dialogue about thought processes and discussions would go a long way, in my opinion, to help the electorate understand at a better level what's going on.
Exactly. And do you think that there's some element of a not just kind of talking about Congress really, but just do you think there's a societal element to a lack of calling out bad behavior, and kind of trickling that down to maybe just overall what's going on in the country? I know it's a broad question, but I think my question really is kind of, do you see that there is this sort of lack of the ability to really just kind of do the right thing? Now, it sounds very idealistic, but I'm concerned on really how that affects the individual person too, because they're kind of caught in a bind. If they really believe in something, but they choose that they kind of go against their conscience, I wonder what sort of effects there could be on morale and on just maybe the effects that it has on people who were thinking of getting into politics, but because of the things that are going on, they might not be interested in going into that anymore.
Yeah, there's some a lot of interesting questions involved there. I think from a top line perspective of how do we get the best people elected, um, I wanted to run for Congress before I worked in Congress, but then I realized if I actually want to do something with the world or like make positive change, that's the last place to do it. And it's not because the institution is not capable. Um, but it just seems like a lot of red tape and bureaucracy, and that we're not electing the right types of people. And that's not to say that everyone who's elected to Congress right now is not a good person or that there aren't gems out there. But the deeper question about the individual, my fiance and I recently were having this discussion about like this general like philosophical question of, do people inherently just want to be mad? Um, and I think that's something we're having to deal with in society right now. And bad behavior is being rewarded in many different ways, whether it's through culture or through social media. Um, Even on like an algorithmic level, it's being rewarded. But I think that it's hard to not take the easy route. The easy route is to be angry and to shut out the other side. It's really hard to convey your thoughts, to understand these issues at a deeper level, to not blame the other side, but to listen and to formulate arguments against. And choosing positivity and happiness is also a difficult thing. It's a conscious decision that you have to make daily. And our society struggles with sympathy and empathy, and so do I. But I think that all of these kind of play into the larger issue of what's going wrong in our political system right now.
Very true. And I want to now ask about the networking element a bit, because it's obviously very related to your app, which we'll talk a little later. But it's really about the networking element and the networking environment. In your time, I mean, you entered kind of the pre-COVID year of 2019. I mean, everything before 2020 is pre-COVID, but you entered during like a quote unquote normal time. Then you experienced COVID working in Congress, and then kind of as things normalize, then you left to do different things. What sort of changes or elements have you seen that you feel are not being addressed enough when it comes to staff networking, and maybe some of the implications that those have on the actual workings of Congress?
I guess I'm thankful that I got to see all three aspects of how it worked. I almost wish I didn't experience Congress before COVID because it's made me miss what it was so much. It has not come back in the same way at all. And I'm sure it will to some extent one day, but there's just so many different like issues that came up, whether it's COVID or January 6th or whatever it was, that really made it hard to return to what Congress once was. So that was difficult to have this idea of what it was and to just never see it come to fruition again. Um, Before COVID, it was so much fun. I loved the aspect of walking down the hallways and just seeing constituents, seeing regular people just walking through, checking out what your daily life is, and feeling like they actually have a voice. And I worked for a member from Georgia, and I was a staff and press assistant, and I saw how good of a job he did at making every single person from his district that came into his office feel extremely welcome and that he was glad to see them. Southern hospitality goes a long way, I guess, but he genuinely meant it. Um, I know not every office is like that, but I saw that and I appreciated it so much. It's hard to have those interactions now, even if it is just like, hey, come check out my office. Like, this is what a red line is. And let's take a quick picture. Not having that little interaction makes it even more easy to dehumanize someone. But during COVID, it really stunk. I had just gotten a new job the day everything shut down on the Hill. And so I'm switching offices to an office where I know one or two people on a very surface level environment. And so I was basically coming in not knowing anyone. In my first 3 months, I was remote and maybe went into the office once or twice when the boss came into town for a quick vote. But those months were very sparse when it came to like in-person contact. And so networking died. I mean, like just social interaction obviously died. But it didn't come back because so many offices, like throughout COVID over the next year and a half, 2 years, didn't come back to like full work in person, which we were always hybrid after that. If we were out of session, some days we were in, but most days we were working from home. And I loved that. But it's not conducive to creating a community on the Hill. And so networking never really got back. Now, there were times where the Dunkin' and Longworth cafeteria started to reemerge as a meeting spot, but the same hustle and bustle never really seemed to be there again, even as we came out of COVID. And I think that'll continually get better and better. And as you see more people from all political perspectives seem to be more comfortable in just having interpersonal reactions again, or interactions again. So I do think that we are seeing an end. Some people I think are going to be on both ends of the spectrum where it's like they just feel like their way is right and they don't want to like bend at all. But I think most people are just ready to be back to normal. Um, so yeah, I mean, staffers, what ultimately gave me the idea for Connect and for the business was political staffers are top tier networkers. Like there's no one who knows how to build a community around them and build up their professional profile like or a political staffer. So I realized that that community wasn't being served properly. And so I wanted to do something about it, but that's the core. And I guess it worked out coming out of COVID that this whole nuanced networking system had been eliminated basically. So it kind of worked out timing wise, but it, I miss the old days, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, I share that feeling too because I'm a little different from you in the sense that I wasn't a staffer, but I was an intern for I'd say for for at least two of the stages. I mean, before COVID in summer 2019, and then again in early 2021. And you mentioned some things that I still kind of think about from that second stint. Kind of that contrast with that first stint. Seeing offices without the lights on. Seeing newspapers pile up. I mean, there are times when you're walking down, it's like someone's not been collecting newspapers and it's not. And I mean, generally that, the intern will kind of be told like, hey, you got to pick up some newspapers from the front door, but there was just no one home, and there's no one there. I feel like that Dunkin' Donuts in Longworth, I feel like that's one of the most productive places, at least before COVID, because of the networking that happens there. I mean, I guess if you look at the amount of donuts and amount of coffee consumed and turns it into something productive, I guess it really is kind of the most productive Dunkin' Donuts out there. But I remember those images there, and what sort of things do you kind of feel are kind of the symbols of, not symbols, but necessary symbols, but just representations of those kind of changes. I mean, or there are some times when you saw something or you kind of remember some of those experiences during COVID when you realized that there's just so much that is missing out there that you kind of wanted to get back?
Yeah, I think it was the same experience that basically everyone else had, this like longing to interact. And I mean, in my circles, we would not thwart COVID guidelines, but I mean, we'd have like friends over to our apartment and we felt like dirty for doing that almost, like that's where it got to for a while. But ultimately, like everyone has a longing in their soul to interact with people. And when that's taken away from you, it does damage mentally, physically. And so I think it was really just for me, it was, I just want to be around people. And I know everyone else felt that too. And I think that that only intensified the partisanship of what we feel, because there wasn't any more walking down the hall and seeing your colleagues who may work across the aisle. There wasn't any form of interpersonal interaction. So it was all digital. It's all behind a profile, a cover photo, a like email. There's no humanizing aspect to any of that. And so it allows you to treat people or to see them as less than, because you're able to characterize them without the like true action of like talking to someone and getting their feedback by seeing them face to face and monitoring what they're doing with their body, with their face, and like seeing how they're responding to something. So it makes it really easy to just say whatever you want. I do think that staffers want to interact with one another though. And I think like one of the things about Connect is maybe we have to just show them, and it's worked really well. But we've been conditioned over the past couple of years, half a decade, 5 years, 6 years at this point, to view the other side as the enemy. It's we've really developed an us versus them mentality. And on top of that, COVID just solidified that type of thinking and let us forget that there was anything ever before that. So now we're kind of having to rewire and be like, hey, like, remember a time when you could just like hang out with people that didn't agree with you on stuff and it wasn't the end of the world. So I think that's a really important aspect of it. And we want to show that we have way more in common than our political badge of either R or D. I agree with so many like thought processes of people across the aisle, and we come to a lot of the same conclusions. We might do it differently at times, but ultimately we agree on a lot more than we disagree on. We just focus on the stuff we don't. And I want to show that we have a lot more in common than we don't too, whether it's where you're from, what your interests are, where you went to school, whatever it may be. I think we need to lean into those aspects of what brings us together so we can have those conversations about what doesn't.
It's such an important mission I think you're on. And Dave, I'm really just so pleased to kind of hear that story and reading about your app a few months ago. And we'll obviously include some links down in the show notes for people to check out. But one question I have for you before we get to more about the app, because I want to ask about the kind of how that process has been going. I think also not just from some of the issues that we've already discussed, but maybe just like the process of being an entrepreneur and trying to start something new here. Something that I think is unusual outside of just the policy space. What is kind of your, since I know some of the things you'll probably not be able to maybe say explicitly, but what is your sense of how the members of Congress feel about their staff not being able to interact with one another, and maybe just something, or at least just some things that you think members of Congress can do to be a part of the solution, to be part of understanding. I'm sure they understand the value of their staff. I mean, just generally speaking, the amount of work that's being done. But what sort of things can you think members can also do to be a part of that solution and help their own staff too, interacting with other staff members to create something I think bigger and better for everybody there.
Ultimately, the tone or the vibe for every office really starts with the congressperson who runs the show. And there's a lot of things that the staffer do, but when it comes to setting up an environment, they're in charge. There are too many Congress people out there that let a environment breed and grow that is partisan. I've loved everyone I've worked for. Each one of them has very unique qualities that are very endearing. Um, and I'm sure most people feel that way about their member. There are some crazy people out there as far as how they treat their staff and ideologies. But anyways, so I do think that like they need to set a better tone as far as like let's emphasize the importance of coalition building. Let's emphasize, I don't know why I can't say that word, the ability to network with people on the other side of the aisle. Let's see the value in that process. Ultimately, one of my closest Hill friends was someone that I met through the inauguration. We were stuck next to each other for 10 hours. So we had to get to know each other. And exact opposite political leanings, but we became fast friends and we had so much to talk about and loved getting to know one another and hearing about their experiences. When we're not forced into those conversations, we're not really having those conversations. But on the other side of it, he was on the rules committee. I was on the rules committee as far as like our members were. And so then it led to us being able to have dialogue with each other and be like, hey, what's going on with this? What's going on with that? Like, where's your member at? And there's extreme value in that. And ultimately, when you go downtown one day or whatever you want to do with your career, now, I don't always agree with like how this system is like done, but like your value is in your network. Your value is in being able to work both sides of the aisle. And I don't think that members of Congress, and maybe it's because it's like kind of an anti-lobbyist mindset, which I understand. But maybe that's why they're like, I don't want my staff like just going and meeting with anyone. But ultimately, I think if you're confident in your agenda, if you're confident in what you believe and how you treat your staff, you should want them to reach out, to meet new people, to open new doors and new opportunities.
It sounds like great stuff, obviously for new interns and new staffers too. To Dave, I think you could be great at having your own orientation session. Dave's orientation session, Congress 101.
All about bipartisanship. Yep, I like
Yeah.
it.
Uh, Fascinating. Well, I want to now go more specifically into your app called Connect. You mentioned a little bit about kind of the origins. How did you go from that mindset of I need to do something about this networking environment or lack of it to now working on the itty gritty parts of it and turning into a product that you're able to show to people and demonstrate, how people can use it for their own benefits and maybe for the benefits of the legislative network as a whole.
Yeah, man, it was a long process. Didn't have a lot of manpower. It was just me. Ultimately, it came out of the prayer that sent me to DC that also ignited this desire in my heart to create a business. And over time actually led to a lot of anxiety because I knew I was supposed to create a business, but the right opportunity not presented itself. So I kind of forced some smaller things like a digital design business and all of that, that didn't work out. And then at the height of my like overwhelming anxiety that I know I'm supposed to create a business, but I don't know what it is, I had kept a notebook in my first 2 years in DC or first year in DC of any business idea I could think of. So I basically just went back through that and realized that a lot of these ideas that I had one-off ideas for actually pieced together this bigger idea of what Connect was. And while none of those small ideas made sense, or they definitely didn't scale, when they were put together in the right fashion, it actually created an opportunity to create a real business. So that was January of 2021. Just to give a time frame, I launched Connect in February/March of 2022. So this was a year-long process. It started with creating business plans and making sure that people actually thought they were legitimate and that this was a good idea. But then luckily through my design background, I just bought a notebook or a sketchbook on Amazon and drew out what I wanted the app to be. After that, I was able to design the whole thing to say like, hey, this is what I want it to look like, which saved me tons of money, which was great. But then I had to hand it off to a development team, which took about 6 months. So the second half of 2021. In the time frame, it's just working nights and weekends, setting everything up for launch. And then January comes, start to like put everything in motion, testing the early versions of the app, make sure everything works, blah, blah, blah. It didn't. There's plenty of problems, but that's just how it goes when you build an app. But started to host some, which worked really well. We hosted some private, like invite only pre-launch events, where I went around and basically handed out invites on the hill to people that I wanted to be there. And the way to RSVP was to share through social media and tag us, which led to a little bit of a buzz. Then I had prayed that I could just figure out how to get an article about Connect out somewhere. And I didn't know how that was going to happen. So I just started reaching out to reporters, got shot down a lot because I was going to like Politico or Washington Post or some of the bigger shots. And then I realized I need to go straight to roll call. Like this is perfect for roll call. So shot Jim Saxa, who does the Herd on the Hills, an email, and he was like, yeah, let's grab a coffee. Talk, loves the idea. He's like, I'm going to come to your beta launch event and just see like the app in motion for the first time. So after that, he writes the story and like, he's like, hey, like, let's get a few pictures. I was like, oh, okay, this is just typical, blah, blah, blah. And then one day I walk into the office and I'd started to get notifications on my phone of like people signing up for my newsletter, like the waitlist newsletter for Connect that was like on our website. Like, why are all these people signing up right now? And I thought to myself, oh, the article must have come out. And I walk over to like our stack of newspapers that every single office has and like flip through, and then I get to roll call and I like was repulsed and like sat back and was like, oh geez, it was like my face on the front cover. And I had no idea that that was coming. But it was a true blessing and it was a great opportunity to get a lot of people hearing about Connect. So that started the journey. Soon after that, we launched in March. We're now at about 1,300 users. The beautiful part of the process is it hasn't cost us a lot of money to get those users. The Hill's a small place. Word carries fast. We've created a successful newsletter, just going direct to them, not spending any money other than really a MailChimp subscription, which is very expensive. But that's been our mode to get to people. Social media has helped a lot too. But it's nice that it's been a somewhat simple process, and hosting events, which we are an aggregate of all upcoming events that are relevant to a staffer, but we also host our own events. Those have been huge for getting people out, whether it's a wine and cheese event, congressional trivia, which was a huge hit, with Ballast Research, to bowling nights, literally anything we've had it. So it's been a really good opportunity, and that's spurred like really cool discussions.
That's awesome to hear, Dave. I mean, just you're kind of reinventing that social scene, kind of bringing back those elements of bowling, of trivia, and it's interesting how you met over coffee to get that article out. I always tell people, say the power of grabbing a cup of coffee with someone is
Yes.
unprecedented. I mean, you probably know this firsthand. It's like that's why it was when I tell people I say I was hanging out at the Dunkin' Donuts a lot in Longworth. It's not because I was just there for the donuts. It's because there were a lot of people I wanted to talk to, and I think staffers are just really some of the most transparent, kind of straightforward people. They tell you about all these kinds of experiences and just tips. Especially for a little intern like myself on the Hill there. And I want to ask you about a little bit more about how it works, but I'm also going to kind of add a little bit of a question here too, which is how is this different from some of the from say like a social media app or something, or like in terms of the inner workings there? Are there any kinds of like unique features that make it good for the specific customers that you're going after, or you're the specific staffers that you want to have on the app?
Yeah. And to answer your last question real quick, which I probably did a bad job of, but from a business standpoint, just for anyone who ever wants to create a business, don't think that I knew what I was doing. Like I had no idea what I was doing. I just figured it out. So don't feel like you've had to go get an MBA first or whatever. Just do it. Just if you have an idea that you really like and people believe in it, then, or even if they don't, but you do, just research. Google is your best friend. Anyways, so the question I get most often is, how is this different than LinkedIn? Or, oh, this is LinkedIn for political staffers. And the answer is no. It's not, but I see why they can draw the comparison. In my mind, what I think as a society, we're going beyond political staffers right now. We're talking about young professionals in America. We don't have apps that really serve us. Um, or our true experience. We have Facebook, which sees us as a dollar sign, but also it's just like gone so far beyond what was really popular for them, which was bringing people together. A crazy good idea, and turned it into so many other ideas. And then you have LinkedIn on the other side, which is extremely useful, but extremely professional. And I'd argue a little buttoned up. Um, I think there needs to be something in the middle there. And then obviously with Instagram or TikTok, that's just that I wouldn't even call those social media at this point. Instagram is more so. TikTok is not a social media. It's designed to just get you stuck on your phone and to not be social, which most social networks are at this point. And we're really trying to fight against that, which is a whole different conversation of how do you monetize something without getting your person addicted to their phone. But so I think there needs to be something in the middle. I thought there did, and now we're doing it. Social networking is on one side, professional networking is on the other. They need to be one and the same. They are the same for a young professional. When you go to get a coffee with someone, when you meet someone at an event, you don't know if you're going to become best friends with them, they're going to become a drinking buddy after work, or they could get you your next job. You really don't know where that conversation is going to go. And a lot of times I'd go into coffees and be like, oh, like this person's going to help me professionally. And I walk out of it being like, oh, like I just found a new friend, you know? So I don't think that they should be separate. We don't live our lives like that. Increasingly, work and play are intertwined. And so instead of like trying to fight off the reality, let's create something that helps you navigate both in one place and delete other apps. So we want to do that with political staffers at the moment. I think there's a need to have all these things in one place. But again, a long way of answering your question, so apologies.
No, you're good. It's all. I think it's wonderful. Just do. I think have that vision, and I think the point that you alluded to, which is the action part, because when you're messaging on LinkedIn or you're on Facebook or Instagram, there's really no incentive to follow up. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I've tried to get someone off of those apps in a way, to get their phone number and all that, maybe for social reasons or professional reasons. But it just never materializes because there's no expectation to follow up. It's just like everyone is stuck on the app there, and there's just nothing to follow that through. And I think you're right, because when I had those coffees with those staffers and all, I wasn't emailing them, using Outlook email, just like, hey, just wanted to say hi,
Yeah.
like, first of all, I'd be the weirdest intern ever. But the second thing is, it wouldn't, I think it wouldn't serve a good purpose for the staffer I was interacting for. And it kind of goes against the grain of what Congress should be.
Yeah. Ultimately, at this point, like our social media is set up to amass digital connections, not to actually meet people in person. So we're trying to fight against that and create something that's truly meant to encourage interpersonal relationships.
Absolutely. And I want to now turn to some audio testimonials that Dave has provided. And I think it's just good to listen to some people who have perspectives on the Connect app and their experiences with it, and maybe just some other points that they want to bring up on the networking environment in Congress. So let's take a listen to that.
Hi, I've been a Connect user since pretty much the beginning, I would say day one. I love using the app to stay in touch with people that I already know through work and just my time in DC, but I also love using the app to go to the events. I've met a lot of cool people through the events, and I've actually formed a few friendships that have continued on further from Connect events. I even have made some friends across the aisle that I'm really excited about creating more of a working relationship with. I'm really excited for the next version of the app and to make even more friends in the future.
Hey everybody, my name is David D'Antonio, and let me tell you why I love Connect. I was one of the first users that was able to download the app during the beta testing. I've loved it ever since. I've been able to go to some amazing events and meet some amazing people from across the aisle, as well as my own party. I'm constantly getting people to download the app, and I'm able to use it to grab coffees, expanding my network and also expanding theirs. And I can't wait for Connect to expand with all the cool features that are upcoming. And I hope you love it just as much as I do.
All right. Well, we are fascinated by really just some of the amazing things that we've heard from the audit testimonials. Thanks to Dave, by the way, for putting that together. And Dave, kind of just to, as we draw towards the close for our main part of the discussion here, there's a lot of things that I think Connect can really do, and that's why I really want to be on the program, which is to really share this app. What other things do you see, or other solutions you find could also enhance bipartisanship in Congress, and maybe just change the way that we see Congress, but also how Congress works?
Yeah, for sure. So to create a broader vision first of like what we want Connect to be and what it is now. So if I haven't been very clear about this, which I probably haven't, like right now, what we're doing is social and professional networking app for people who work in the House and Senate. For our MVP, the minimum viable product, we are just testing this out to make sure that we have a proof of concept, which turns out we do, which is great. But we're centering it around in-person events right now, group messaging, and getting coffees with people. You can meet people through the app, send them coffee invites, and then track all the coffees you've gotten. You can rate them privately, which will then tell our algorithm how to recommend coffees for you in the future. But something we're doing that's going to be starting in January of this year. Right now, we're building a new version of the app. And we're going to start to expand in January. But one of the main features we're adding in is something called Connect Purple. I met someone named Jason Sism, a buddy of mine now, who I worked on the Hill, was a lobbyist, currently is still a lobbyist. But he created a side project called Purple Coffees. And as I expressed my vision of what I wanted to this be in the roll call article, he reached out and said, hey, we should grab coffee sometime. So that turned into what is now Connect Purple inside the app. And what it's going to be is an opt-in system where when you sign up, we ask you, do you want to be connected with people across the aisle? And we'll match you based on similar interests, whatever it may be, and really facilitate these conversations to help people meet across the aisle. We're super excited about this. I think it's going to be a really cool feature. But on a grander scale, we are, while we're doing this, going to start to open up our app to more of the political environment. So ultimately, while we're creating this opportunity to increase bipartisanship, we also want to create an opportunity for our users to enhance their professional and social career and life. We plan to do that first in January by launching to the White House, Supreme Court, campaign committees. Soon after, move on to anyone in the DMV area with .gov.mil email. Soon after, we want to bring the private sector and the nonprofit side of politics too. So lobbying, PR, press, trade associations, all of these organizations that deal with politics inside or out. We want to create an entire political ecosystem for these people to be inside of, to help build community and to help build your professional Rolodex and your network. So that's how we want to do this. We want to form like this broader community of people that are involved in this area and start to have discussions about this through events on a networking level and bringing people together to interact, but also on a level of hosting forums, hosting debates, hosting discussions about the power of getting coffee with people. I think like that's a true discussion that needs to be had. And I know you agree. So that I think like true conversations around bipartisanship and reform to Congress, and reform to our political system in general, and just create conversations around that. I also have some wacky ideas that are kind of outside of Connect's jurisdiction on this, but I think it could be really interesting if we didn't let Congress people on cable TV. I think now this is a half-baked idea. I've thought of this before, but I have not put tons of thought into it. But in my mind, it's like if we took away that opportunity for them to go on national television and do their little 5-minute clips, it would take away a lot of the divisiveness we're seeing. If we limited interaction to a more localized environment to your actual constituents and get them talking to the people that matter instead of on Twitter where it's this audience that truly cannot vote for you. If we can do that, I think the message changes. It becomes more constructive. It becomes more thoughtful. And I think there's actually a way to do this through Connect one day. So we are exploring options of how we connect Congress people to their constituents. This has been in the very early stages, and it's more of a concept than a product. Well, it's definitely not a product. But I think if we get away from social media in its current form and the current TV system we have, we could really see some change in how we experience bipartisanship. And the other side of that is kind of what I mentioned earlier as admitting what you do wrong is okay. It makes you human. We don't really allow for that in society these days. We expect everyone to be perfect. But I think if we could, and this is a pipe dream, but I have hope. If we could put egos aside, if we could really humble ourselves as a society and be okay with people making mistakes and be open to new ideas and to hearing something we don't agree with and not prejudging someone, I think we would open ourselves up to a lot of new ideas, new conversations, and beautiful moments.
I love what you said, Dave, about the vision that you have, and I have no doubt that in our limited interactions, I can tell, especially that conversation and in your office at the time, we did have an espresso. I remember that espresso machine. That was the key ingredient here.
I have one of those on my registry. So if anyone in the audience wants to get that on our wedding registry for us, I would be greatly appreciated.
Such good stuff. I mean, espresso was good. I was like, I had to see this thing. Dave was telling me, like, we got this espresso machine. He's like, I got to see that too as we were conversing. But anyway, I digress a little bit. I think what you said is so vital, and I share that vision with you too, and hopefully the audience, I think, shares that with you, because I believe when we're open to more ideas, I think it's better for our mental health. It's better for our well-being, because it doesn't seem like everything is so stressful and just angry, but that there is some level of how you can be passionate about an issue, and yet you could still kind of be at peace with yourself, by being at peace with others. And I think this is kind of the main thing with partisanship, is that there really is no room for that kind of feeling. And I love that purple element. I just thought of it, how in the past, purple used to represent the elite, like something very powerful. And it's kind of it's kind of interesting how it is the blend of blue and red. It turns into something that historically has always been seen as, like,
Regal.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, I like it. I'm gonna use that somehow.
Yes. Well, Dave, before we wrap up, I think, first of all, thank you so much for sharing more about the story of the Connect app. I think it's really wonderful. It's going to be great for Congress. It's going to be great for the American people ultimately, when they might not see the specific social interactions, but they'll know, at least hopefully we can build confidence that our Congress is literally interactive with each other. And I want to tie this in with George Washington's farewell address. As you know, there's 6 values that really come into play in these podcast episodes: patriotism, faith, national unity, education, fiscal responsibility, and civility. If you could pick one or more of those and tie that back in with some of the things that you're doing in our conversation today, what sort of values do you think you would prioritize the most, and why?
So on a personal level, I'd have to choose faith. Now, I don't think that's necessarily acceptable on the wide scale, because we did create our society to be open to all faiths, and to make this a safe place for them. But in my life, I would not be where I was at in any way if it wasn't for my pursuit of Jesus and trying to live a better life. And trying to learn how to love people, and to treat people with true respect and love, and to be patient. Our democracy, and I believe that capitalism as well, can't thrive without virtuous leaders. Now, obviously, the founders had that same opinion, and Washington touches on that as well. He also emphasizes that we need wise people as our leaders. I don't necessarily know if we're living up to that standard right now. And I think the reason why we're having so many problems in our country and people don't have faith in democracy or faith in capitalism is because the people at the top are not always virtuous. Now, there are plenty that are, but there are a lot that aren't. And so I do think that virtue is a super important aspect of that. And I think for me personally, my virtue is pursued through my morality that I perceive through the Bible. For other people, it's different. But lack of morality leads to chaos, in my opinion. And on the other side of that, I just think we need to do a better job of treating people with respect. And if we can make that a common element, and the patriotism aspect of it's us versus the world, it's us versus whatever, it's not us versus them, it's not Republican versus Democrat. We have to unite, and we've gotten into this mindset in our culture that unity means unity of thought, and it doesn't. Unity needs to be based around patriotism and American ideals, but then American ideals mean that there's disagreement, and the founders knew that there would be partisanship and understood the importance of partisanship, but not toxic partisanship. That's when the house burns down, and that's where we're at. So I do think that there needs to be a reform in how we see one another, and how we unite together as Americans to disagree in a rational and just calm manner.
Very well said. A calm manner with a cup of coffee in your hand.
Yeah, while jittering.
Yes, exactly. Well, Dave, I just cannot thank you enough for being onto the program. And I know that you're working so hard. I mean, you mentioned just a bit about your work lifestyle. And this is after, a very, very heavy work style in Congress too. So I just want to say it's always a pleasure to talk with you, and it's great to catch up with you again after some time. And not to mention, I think a good shout out to so many of the staffers who work very long hours, because I certainly learned that as an intern, and I think it's one of the biggest lessons you can learn is knowing how much people are working, to get things done, and just the crazy hours. I mean, the intern hours are kind of set, but it's no way a reflection of what the actual hours are for most staffers. So I just want to really tip my hat out to a lot of those people who, it might be the coffee, it might be some other magic that I don't know about, but it's what keeps the House and Senate going somehow.
Yeah, absolutely. They have a true drive. It's great to see, and it gives me a lot of hope. The hope and the future for our country truly lies in the most powerful place in America, but it's not the people who are leading. It's the people who work for the leaders. They have the true power, and I see tons of opportunities for us to make a difference here.
And what's the best way for people to obviously learn more about the app and get to know what you're up to, any new projects that come up?
Yeah, check us out on Instagram is probably the best way, at CNCT app. Please don't call it CNCT. It's pronounced Connect.
That's right. Yeah. Number one rule. That's right. Yeah. So fantastic. I'll leave those links down in the show notes below. But Dave, it was a pleasure to have you on. And thank you so much for just all the things that you've shared with us today.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate it.
And with that, thank you so much for listening to this episode. I hope you enjoyed our conversation with Dave Tennent and learning more about Congress and the Connect app. Be sure to check out the links down in the show notes below. If you haven't already, subscribe to our podcast if you haven't done so. Have a great rest of your week, and remember, a day in America is always better when we are with our friends and fellow citizens.